My name is Amara, and this is the story of how I served the coldest revenge at my own graduation party. Picture this: a perfectly manicured garden party in the backyard of my family's mansion. White tablecloths fluttering in the June breeze, crystal glasses catching the afternoon sunlight, and about 50 of my family's closest friends and relatives gathered to celebrate my high school graduation. The air smelled like jasmine and expensive perfume, mixed with the kind of self-satisfaction that only comes from old money and older prejudices. I stood there in my white sundress, watching these people who had known me my entire life, yet somehow still managed to see me as nothing more than their charity case with a pretty smile and good grades. Little did they know, I was about to shatter their comfortable little world with 4 simple words from Harvard University. But let me back up, because this story doesn't start with my triumph. It starts with 18 years of being underestimated. 18 years of watching my white cousins get praised for mediocrity, while I had to be exceptional just to be noticed. And 18 years of learning that sometimes the best revenge isn't served hot. It's served with an acceptance letter from the most prestigious university in the world. You see, I learned early that in my family, there were the real children, and then there was me. Not because I was adopted, no, I was very much their blood. But because my skin was darker, my hair was different, and somehow that translated to lower expectations in their minds. They never said it outright, of course. These were educated, liberal people who would never dream of being openly racist. Instead, they served their prejudice with a smile and a pat on the head, wrapped in concerns about being realistic and not setting expectations too high. The moment that changed everything happened exactly 3 hours into my graduation party. I was standing by the dessert table, picking at a piece of cake that cost more than most people's weekly groceries, when my Aunt Catherine approached me with that particular smile she reserved for occasions when she wanted to feel good about herself. Catherine was my father's sister, the kind of woman who wore her blonde hair in a perfect bob and her privilege like a designer handbag. Expensive, obvious, and carried with the assumption that everyone would admire it. She had that way of speaking that made everything sound like a compliment while actually being a carefully crafted insult. A skill she had perfected over years of country club lunches and charity galas, where she could practice her benevolent racism on other people's children. "Amara, sweetheart," she said, pulling me into one of those hugs that feels more like a performance than genuine affection. "I am just so proud of you. A state university. What a wonderful achievement. You should be so proud of yourself, honey. After all, let's be realistic. Not everyone is cut out to be Ivy League material." She delivered this line while her eyes drifted across the garden to where her son Blake was holding court near the bar, regaling a group of adults with some story that had them all laughing appreciatively. Blake, with his sandy hair and easy smile, who had just been accepted to a decent private university with a 1350 SAT score, a score I had surpassed by 200 points, not that anyone in this family seemed to remember that detail. That was the moment. That was the exact second when I decided that my response wouldn't be words, wouldn't be anger, wouldn't be tears. It would be something much more devastating. If you've ever been underestimated, if you've ever had someone assume you were less capable because of how you look or where you come from, if you've ever dreamed of the day when you could prove everyone wrong in the most spectacular way possible, then you need to subscribe to Black Revenge Diaries. Because this is just the beginning of my story. And trust me, it gets so much better. I smiled at Aunt Catherine, that same polite smile I had been perfecting since childhood, and said, "Thank you so much for your support, Aunt Catherine. It means the world to me." But inside, I was already planning her humiliation. You see, what Catherine didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I had been accepted to Harvard University 3 months ago. Not just accepted, but accepted with a full scholarship and a personal note from the admissions committee praising my exceptional academic achievements and extraordinary potential. The letter was sitting in my bedroom, along with acceptance letters from Yale, Princeton, Stanford, and MIT. But Harvard, that was the crown jewel, the one that would hurt the most when I finally revealed it. Let me tell you how I got there, because this wasn't luck, and it wasn't affirmative action, and it wasn't any of the other diminishing explanations that people like Catherine would inevitably use to minimize my achievement. This was the result of a calculated, methodical campaign that I had been waging since I was 14 years old, and first realized that I would have to work twice as hard to get half the recognition that came naturally to my cousins. While Blake was sleeping in until noon during summer vacations, I was up at 5 a.m, studying for the SATs in the quiet darkness of my room, surrounded by prep books that I had bought with money from my part-time job at the local bookstore. While my cousin Emma was getting tutored by expensive private instructors that her parents hired without a second thought, I was teaching myself calculus from YouTube videos in Khan Academy, staying up until 2 a.m. to master concepts that she would later claim were too hard for her delicate constitution. I remember the day my guidance counselor, Mrs. Patterson, called my parents in for a conference during my junior year. She was a well-meaning woman with kind eyes and a tendency to speak in the sort of careful, measured tones that people use when they're trying to deliver bad news gently. "Amara is a wonderful student," she began, sitting across from my parents in her cramped office filled with college brochures and motivational posters. "Truly exceptional, especially considering her background." That pause, that tiny hesitation before the word background, told me everything I needed to know about how she saw me. But I think we need to be realistic about her college options. The Ivy League schools are extremely competitive, and while Amara is certainly bright, there are so many factors that go into admissions decisions. My father, Robert, God bless him, interrupted her right there. "What exactly are you suggesting, Mrs. Patterson?" His voice had that edge to it that he got when someone was about to insult his daughter, and I loved him for it. My father had always been my greatest advocate, the one person in our family who never seemed to see my skin color as a limitation, or my achievements as surprising. He was the one who encouraged me to take AP classes, who drove me to academic competitions on weekends, who stayed up late helping me with college applications, even though he had to be at work at 6 a.m. "I'm just saying," Mrs. Patterson continued, clearly uncomfortable with my father's directness, "that there are many excellent schools that would be thrilled to have a student like Amara. State universities, smaller liberal arts colleges, places where she could really shine and not feel overwhelmed by the competition." She meant well, I suppose, but her meaning was clear. Aim lower, expect less, be grateful for whatever scraps of opportunity came my way. That night, I sat in my room surrounded by college applications and felt the familiar fire of determination burning in my chest. I had already taken the SAT twice, scoring 1540 and then 1560 on my second attempt. I had a 4.0 GPA, was president of 3 clubs, had over 500 hours of community service, and had spent my summers doing research internships at the local university. My college essay was about overcoming adversity, but not in the way people expected. It was about overcoming the adversity of low expectations, about refusing to let other people's limitations become my own. I wrote about the power of proving people wrong, about the satisfaction of exceeding every assumption that had ever been made about my potential. The Harvard application was the most important thing I had ever done in my life. I spent 3 months perfecting it, revising my essays until every word carried weight, crafting a narrative that showed not just what I had accomplished, but who I was and who I intended to become. I wrote about my family, about growing up in privilege, but still facing the subtle prejudices that came with being the darkest face at every gathering. I wrote about using that isolation as motivation, about channeling the energy that could have become bitterness into academic excellence instead. I wrote about my plans to study constitutional law, about my dream of becoming a Supreme Court justice, about using my eventual position of power to protect other kids who looked like me from the soft bigotry of lowered expectations. When the acceptance letter arrived in March, I was home alone, having stayed back from school with a fake stomachache because I knew the decision was coming, and I couldn't bear the thought of opening it in front of other people. The envelope was thick, which was a good sign, but I still felt my hands shaking as I tore it open. "Dear Ms. Amara Johnson," it began, and I had to stop reading for a moment to catch my breath. "On behalf of the President and Fellows of Harvard College, I am pleased to inform you that the Committee on Admissions has admitted you to the class of 2029. The committee was impressed by your exceptional academic record, your leadership potential, and your commitment to social justice. We believe you will make significant contributions to the Harvard community and beyond." I read those words over and over again, memorizing every phrase, every punctuation mark. This wasn't just an acceptance letter. It was vindication, validation, proof that I had been right all along about my own potential. I called my father at work, and when I told him the news, I could hear him crying on the other end of the line. "I'm so proud of you, baby girl," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You did it. You actually did it." But then he said something that surprised me. "When are you going to tell the family?" I thought about it for a moment. About Aunt Catherine and her patronizing smiles. About Blake and his mediocre achievements that were celebrated like Nobel Prize wins. About all the times I had been patted on the head and told to be realistic about my dreams. "I'm not," I said finally. "Not yet. I want to wait for the right moment." And that's when my father, who knew his family better than anyone, got that sly smile in his voice that I recognized from childhood, the one that meant he was about to be complicit in some delicious mischief. "Oh, I see," he said. "You want to make it memorable." We spent the next hour planning what we would later call the Harvard reveal, a moment of such perfect poetic justice that it still makes me smile 3 years later. The plan was simple. Let them make their assumptions. Let them deliver their backhanded compliments and their low expectations, and then destroy their comfortable prejudices with the truth. We would wait until my graduation party, when the whole extended family would be gathered together, when they would all be feeling generous and condescending, ready to pat me on the head for my nice little achievement at a state school. And then I would show them exactly what Ivy League material looked like. The weeks leading up to graduation were a masterclass in acting. I had to pretend to be excited about my state university acceptance, had to smile and nod when relatives congratulated me on my wonderful opportunity, had to bite my tongue when Blake's acceptance to his decent but not elite private school was celebrated like he had been chosen to colonize Mars. It was actually fascinating, from an anthropological perspective, to watch how my family's racism expressed itself in their assumptions. They weren't burning crosses or using slurs. They were much too sophisticated for that. Instead, they were simply incapable of imagining that I might be capable of more than they expected from someone who looked like me. The psychological weight of carrying that secret for 3 months was both exhausting and exhilarating. Every family dinner became a performance. Every conversation a careful navigation between maintaining the illusion and not outright lying. When my cousin Emma asked where I would be going to college, I would say, "I'm still deciding between a few options," which was technically true since I had to choose between Harvard, Yale, and Princeton. When Uncle David made jokes about how I'd probably struggle with the academic rigor of college, I would laugh along while mentally composing my valedictorian speech for Harvard Law School. The hardest part was watching my parents, especially my father, bite their tongues when family members made their casual, thoughtless comments about my limitations and realistic expectations. But here's the thing about keeping a secret that big. It changes you. Every day that I held on to that Harvard acceptance letter, I felt myself becoming more confident, more self-assured, more aware of my own power. I wasn't just Amara anymore. I was Amara who got into Harvard, Amara who had exceeded every expectation, Amara who was about to serve the most satisfying dish of revenge that had ever been prepared. I started walking differently, talking differently, carrying myself with the quiet confidence of someone who knew something that everyone else didn't. Some people might call it arrogance, but I prefer to think of it as finally recognizing my own worth. It's funny how people try to put you in boxes to make themselves feel comfortable. They don't do it out of malice, necessarily, but out of their own limitations, their own inability to imagine possibilities beyond their narrow worldview. The question I always asked myself was, how do you break the box without breaking yourself in the process? How do you prove people wrong without becoming bitter, without letting their small-mindedness make you smaller? If you've ever felt trapped by other people's expectations, if you've ever had someone try to limit your dreams because of their own fears, leave a like on this video to show me I'm not alone, and tell me in the comments what box people tried to put you in. Because I guarantee you, whatever box they built for you, it's too small for who you're meant to become. The day of my graduation party dawned clear and bright, one of those perfect June days that seemed designed for outdoor celebrations. I woke up early and spent extra time getting ready, choosing my outfit carefully. A white sundress that was elegant but not too formal, jewelry that was noticeable but not ostentatious, hair and makeup that said successful young woman, without trying too hard. I wanted to look the part of someone who belonged at Harvard, even though no one knew that's where I was headed. As I stood in front of my bedroom mirror, I caught sight of the Harvard acceptance letter on my dresser, and I felt that familiar surge of anticipation. Today was the day. Today was when 18 years of underestimation would finally be answered. The party setup was everything I had expected. My mother had outdone herself with the decorations, creating an elegant garden party atmosphere that would have made Martha Stewart proud. White tents provided shade over perfectly arranged tables. Flowers from our own garden created beautiful centerpieces, and a small stage had been set up for speeches and toasts. The guest list was a who's who of our extended family and family friends, all the people who had watched me grow up, all the people who thought they knew exactly what I was capable of achieving. As I watched the catering staff put the finishing touches on the buffet table, I felt like a general surveying the battlefield before the decisive engagement. The first few hours of the party were exactly what I had anticipated. A parade of well-meaning but patronizing congratulations from relatives who seemed surprised that I had managed to graduate from high school with honors. "Oh, Amara, you've done so well for yourself," said my great-aunt Margaret, patting my arm with the kind of condescending affection usually reserved for small children or pets. "Your parents must be so proud. A college education. Imagine that. As if the idea of me attending college was some kind of miraculous achievement, rather than the natural progression of a straight-A student with a 1560 SAT score. But the worst was yet to come. About halfway through the party, as people were finishing their meals and moving into the more social phase of the celebration, I noticed Blake holding court near the bar area, surrounded by a group of adults who were hanging on his every word. He was telling the story of his college acceptance process, embellishing the details in the way that mediocre people do when they want to make their modest achievements sound impressive. "Well, you know, I had my choice of several schools," he was saying with false modesty, "but I really felt like Riverside University was the best fit for me. The admissions counselor said my essay was one of the most compelling they'd read. I knew for a fact that Blake had been waitlisted at 3 schools and had only gotten into Riverside because his father knew someone on the alumni board. But I watched the adults nod and smile as if he were describing his acceptance to Oxford. That's when Aunt Catherine made her move, approaching me with that particular combination of sympathy and superiority that she had perfected over years of charity work and social climbing. She was wearing a pale blue dress that probably cost more than my car, her blonde hair perfectly styled, her smile as artificial as the sweetener in her diet cocktail. "Amara, darling," she said, taking my arm and steering me slightly away from the group. "I wanted to have a private moment with you before the speeches begin. I hope you know how proud we all are of you. State University is such a wonderful opportunity, and you should be so proud of yourself. Not everyone is cut out for the Ivy League after all. Those schools are so competitive, so demanding. I think you'll be much happier somewhere where you can really shine without all that pressure." And there it was. The moment I had been waiting for, the perfect setup for my revenge. She had delivered the exact line I had been hoping for, complete with the condescending tone and the backhanded compliment wrapped in false concern. I looked at her smiling face, at the way her eyes kept drifting over to Blake, as if to say, "Now there's Ivy League material." And I felt that familiar cold fire of determination burning in my chest. This was it. This was the moment when 18 years of being underestimated would finally be answered. "Thank you so much, Aunt Catherine," I said, matching her artificial smile with one of my own. "Your support means everything to me. I can't wait to share my plans with everyone." The irony was lost on her, of course. She had no idea that she had just provided the perfect introduction to her own humiliation. She gave me another one of those performative hugs, and then glided away to rejoin the adults, probably feeling very good about herself for being so encouraging to her disadvantaged niece. I spent the next hour in a state of barely contained anticipation, watching the party unfold around me like a play where I was the only one who knew how it would end. I made small talk with relatives, accepted more condescending congratulations, and waited for the moment when the speeches would begin. My father caught my eye several times across the garden, and I could see in his expression that he was just as excited as I was. He knew what was coming. He knew that his daughter was about to rewrite the entire family narrative in the most spectacular way possible. Finally, as the afternoon sun began to cast longer shadows across the garden, my father stepped up to the microphone that had been set up on the small stage. The conversations gradually died down as people realized it was time for the formal part of the celebration. "Thank you all for coming today," he began, his voice carrying clearly across the garden. "It means the world to our family to have you here to celebrate Amara's graduation. She has worked so hard for this moment, and we couldn't be prouder of the young woman she has become." There was a warm round of applause, and I felt a surge of love for my father, who had always been my greatest champion, but I also felt the familiar undercurrent of condescension from the audience. The subtle sense that they were applauding my effort rather than my achievement, patting me on the head for trying so hard rather than recognizing actual excellence. That was about to change. "Before we continue with the celebration," my father said, his voice taking on a slightly different tone, "I believe there are some other achievements we should acknowledge today. Blake, would you like to come up and tell everyone about your college plans?" Blake, ever eager for attention, bounded up to the microphone with the kind of confident swagger that only comes from a lifetime of being told you're special for doing ordinary things. "Thanks, Uncle Robert," Blake said, adjusting the microphone with the practiced ease of someone who had never doubted that people wanted to hear what he had to say. "Well, I'm really excited to announce that I'll be attending Riverside University in the fall. It's a great school with an excellent business program, and I'm looking forward to joining their lacrosse team. The coaches there think I have real potential to contribute right away, maybe even start as a sophomore." He paused for effect, clearly expecting applause, and the audience obliged with enthusiastic clapping and several congratulations called out from the crowd. But then Blake did something that was so perfectly, beautifully stupid that I almost wanted to thank him. Instead of stepping away from the microphone, he decided to continue, clearly enjoying the attention. "You know, the college application process is so competitive these days. I was fortunate to have several options, but Riverside really stood out. It's not Harvard or Yale, obviously, but it's a solid school where I can really make an impact. Some people aim for the Ivy League, but I think it's important to be realistic about where you'll actually thrive, you know?" As he said this, his eyes swept across the crowd and landed on me for just a moment, and I saw in his expression the same condescending pity that I had been seeing my entire life. The applause that followed was even more enthusiastic, and I heard several relatives murmuring appreciatively about Blake's maturity and wisdom in choosing a school where he could really succeed. My great-uncle David even called out, "That's the kind of thinking that will take you far in life, son." The irony was so thick I could practically taste it. Here was Blake, with his 1350 SAT score and his C+ average in advanced placement classes that I had aced, being praised for his realistic approach to college selection, while I had been spending months hiding the fact that I had been accepted to the most prestigious university in the world. My father took the microphone back, and I could see in his eyes that same gleeful anticipation that I was feeling. "Thank you, Blake. We're all very proud of you," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "And speaking of college plans, I believe Amara has some news to share as well. Sweetheart, would you like to come up here?" This was it. This was the moment I had been planning for 3 months. The moment when I would finally answer 18 years of underestimation with one devastating revelation. I walked to the microphone with measured steps, feeling the weight of every eye in the garden on me. I could see Aunt Catherine's encouraging but pitying smile, Blake's indulgent expression as he prepared to be supportive of his lesser cousin's modest achievement, and the general air of benevolent condescension that had surrounded me my entire life. I reached into my purse and pulled out the envelope. It was cream-colored, heavy stock paper, with the Harvard University seal embossed in deep crimson. I had been carrying it with me for weeks, waiting for this exact moment. The envelope was slightly worn from being handled so many times, but the seal was still crisp and clear, unmistakably Harvard. I held it up so everyone could see it, and I watched as several people in the crowd squinted, trying to make out what it was. "Thank you all for being here today," I began, my voice steady and clear. "This has been such a wonderful celebration, and I'm so grateful for all of your support over the years. Your encouragement has meant everything to me, especially during those times when people suggested I should be realistic about my goals and practical about my expectations." I paused, letting that settle in, watching as a few people in the crowd began to look slightly uncomfortable. "I wanted to share something with you today," I continued, slowly opening the envelope. "Something that I've been keeping private for a few months now. waiting for the right moment to announce it to the family. I could see Aunt Catherine leaning forward slightly, probably expecting me to announce which state university I would be attending, ready with her supportive but patronizing response. I unfolded the letter, the distinctive Harvard letterhead clearly visible to anyone in the front rows. "Dear Ms. Amara Johnson," I read, my voice carrying clearly across the suddenly silent garden. "On behalf of the President and Fellows of Harvard College, I am pleased to inform you that the Committee on Admissions has admitted you to the class of 2029. The silence that followed was absolutely perfect. It was the kind of silence that falls when people's entire worldview has just been shattered, when their comfortable assumptions have been revealed as the prejudiced nonsense they always were. I looked up from the letter and saw exactly what I had been hoping to see. Aunt Catherine's face had gone completely white, her mouth slightly open in shock. Blake looked like he had been slapped. Several people in the crowd were blinking rapidly, as if they thought they might have misheard. But I wasn't finished. The committee was particularly impressed by my academic record, my leadership potential, and my commitment to social justice. I continued reading. "We believe you will make significant contributions to the Harvard community and beyond. We are pleased to offer you a full scholarship based on your exceptional achievements." I folded the letter and looked directly at Aunt Catherine, whose face had now progressed from white to a rather interesting shade of green. "So yes, Aunt Catherine," I said, my voice perfectly calm and controlled. "It turns out I am Ivy League material after all. In fact, I'm Harvard material, with a full scholarship, based on merit." The emphasis on that last phrase was probably unnecessary, but I had been waiting 18 years to say it, and I was going to savor every syllable. The garden remained silent for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only about 30 seconds. Then slowly, the applause began. It started with my father, who was beaming with pride and clapping enthusiastically. Then a few other relatives joined in, and gradually the entire crowd was applauding, though I could see in many faces a mixture of shock, embarrassment, and what I could only describe as cognitive dissonance as they tried to reconcile their assumptions about me with this new reality. But the best part, the absolute perfect cherry on top of my revenge sundae, was watching Blake try to recover from the fact that his cousin, the one who wasn't supposed to be Ivy League material, had just announced her acceptance to the most prestigious university in the world while he was attending a school that most people had never heard of. He started clapping too, but I could see in his eyes that he was doing rapid mental calculations, trying to figure out how this changed his position in the family hierarchy. "Congratulations, Amara," he said, his voice slightly strained. That's really impressive. Harvard, wow. I mean, I always knew you were smart, but Harvard." He seemed to be having trouble processing this information, which was understandable since it completely demolished the narrative he had been living his entire life. The story where he was the academic star of the family, and I was the one who tried hard but had natural limitations. Aunt Catherine, to her credit, managed to compose herself enough to approach me after I stepped away from the microphone. Her smile was back in place, but it was shakier now, less confident. "Amara, darling," she said, her voice slightly higher than usual. "I had no idea. Harvard, that's wonderful news. I'm so proud of you." But I could see in her eyes that she was also doing calculations, trying to figure out how to spin this development in a way that didn't make her look like the prejudiced fool she had just revealed herself to be. "Thank you, Aunt Catherine," I replied, matching her artificial sweetness with my own. "I know you always believed in me, even when you were encouraging me to be realistic about my limitations. Your support has been so meaningful." The sarcasm was subtle enough that she couldn't call me out on it, but clear enough that she understood exactly what I was saying. The rest of the party passed in a blur of congratulations, backpedaling, and hasty revisions of family narratives. Suddenly, everyone remembered how they had always known I was special, how they had always said I would go far, how they had never doubted my potential. It was fascinating to watch people rewrite history in real time, to see how quickly they could adjust their memories to fit this new reality where I wasn't the family charity case but the family success story. My great-aunt Margaret, who had earlier congratulated me on simply managing to graduate from high school, now claimed that she had always seen something special in me. Uncle David, who had made jokes about my ability to handle college-level work, now wanted to discuss my plans for law school and my career in constitutional law. It was like watching a group of people suddenly realize they had been betting on the wrong horse for 18 years and desperately trying to pretend they had been supporting the winner all along. But the sweetest moment came near the end of the party, when most of the guests had left and only close family remained. I was sitting with my parents, still slightly in shock from the afternoon's events, when Blake approached us with a humility I had never seen from him before. "Amara," he said, actually looking somewhat embarrassed, "I owe you an apology. I think I haven't given you enough credit over the years. Harvard is incredible, and you obviously deserve it. I guess I just never realized how smart you really are." It was the closest thing to an acknowledgement of his own prejudice that I was likely to get. And honestly, it was more than I had expected. "Thank you, Blake," I said. "I appreciate that. And congratulations on Riverside. It sounds like a great fit for you." I meant it too. My revenge wasn't about destroying Blake or making him feel bad about his own achievements. It was about forcing all of them, to confront their assumptions about what I was capable of. As I sat there in the fading afternoon light, surrounded by family members who were still trying to process this new version of reality, I realized that this moment wasn't just about proving them wrong. It was about proving to myself that I had been right all along about my own potential, that the voice in my head that had always whispered, "You can do more than they think," had been telling the truth. For 18 years, I had been living with the cognitive dissonance of knowing I was capable of excellence while being treated as if I were lucky to achieve adequacy. Today, that dissonance had finally been resolved. The psychological impact of keeping that secret for 3 months had been preparation for this moment, training for the discipline required to excel at Harvard and beyond. Every day that I had smiled and nodded while relatives made their casual assumptions about my limitations had been practice for the kind of grace under pressure that would serve me well in law school, in my career, and in life. I had learned to transform their underestimation into my motivation, their prejudice into my power. That night, after all the guests had gone home and the caterers had cleaned up the garden, I sat in my room with the Harvard letter spread out on my desk. I read it again, slowly, savoring every word. This wasn't just an acceptance letter. It was vindication, validation, and victory all rolled into one cream-colored piece of paper. Tomorrow, I would start preparing for my freshman year at Harvard. I would study harder than I had ever studied before, not because I had to prove myself to my family anymore, but because I had dreams that were bigger than their small expectations, goals that extended far beyond their narrow vision of what was possible for someone like me. In that moment, I didn't feel hatred or anger toward Aunt Catherine or Blake or any of the others who had underestimated me. I felt something much more powerful. I felt the quiet satisfaction of someone who had played a long game and won completely. They had spent 18 years assuming I was less than I was, and I had spent 3 months proving them wrong in the most spectacular way possible. That wasn't revenge, that was justice. But here's the thing about moments like these. They're not really about the other people at all. They're about you finally seeing yourself clearly, finally understanding your own worth, finally refusing to let other people's limitations become your own. For 18 years, I had been living partially in their reality, the one where I was impressive for someone like me, but not quite impressive enough to be considered truly exceptional. Today, I had stepped fully into my own reality, the one where I was simply exceptional. Period. As I folded the Harvard letter and placed it carefully in my desk drawer, I thought about all the other kids out there who were being told to be realistic about their dreams, to lower their expectations, to settle for less than they were capable of achieving. I thought about the soft bigotry of lowered expectations, about how it operates not through overt hostility, but through gentle discouragement, through the constant message that some dreams are meant for other people, not for you. That's when I made a decision that would shape the rest of my life. I decided that my success at Harvard wouldn't be private, wouldn't be something I kept to myself, or used only for my own advancement. I would use it as a platform to challenge other people's assumptions, to open doors for kids who looked like me, to prove over and over again that excellence has no color, no background, no predetermined category. My revenge against the people who had underestimated me would be to become so successful so undeniably accomplished that no one would ever be able to make those same assumptions about the next kid who walked into that guidance counselor's office or sat at that family dinner table. The morning after my graduation party, I woke up to a dozen text messages from relatives who had apparently spent the night processing what had happened. Most were additional congratulations, but a few were more interesting. Aunt Catherine had sent a long message about how proud she was and how she had always believed in me, conveniently forgetting her comment about Ivy League material. Blake had texted to ask if I could help him with his college application essays for transfer applications, suddenly very interested in my academic strategies. Even my guidance counselor, Mrs. I. Patterson, had somehow heard the news and sent an email congratulating me and asking if she could use my story as an example for other students. But the message that meant the most came from my father, sent at 6 a.m. I have never been more proud to be your dad. You handled yesterday with more grace in class than they deserved. Harvard is lucky to have you, but they don't know it yet. Love you, baby girl. That message made me cry happy tears over my morning coffee, because it reminded me that while I had spent 18 years dealing with family members who underestimated me, I had also been blessed with parents who saw my potential from the very beginning and never wavered in their support. The next few months before I left for Harvard were a masterclass in watching people rewrite history in real time. Suddenly, every family gathering became an opportunity for relatives to share their memories of always knowing I was destined for greatness. Aunt Catherine, in particular, seemed to have developed selective amnesia about her not Ivy League material comment, now telling anyone who would listen about how she had always seen something special in me and had been so proud to watch me grow into my potential. It was almost impressive, really, the speed with which she managed to convince herself that she had been supportive all along. But the most satisfying part wasn't watching them scramble to revise their narratives. It was watching how my success forced them to confront their own unconscious biases. Blake, who had spent years being celebrated for achievements that paled in comparison to mine, suddenly found himself in the uncomfortable position of being the cousin who also got into college. Sighing, his parents still tried to make his Riverside University acceptance sound impressive, but there's no spinning your way out of the shadow cast by Harvard, especially when it comes with a full scholarship. The ripple effects extended beyond my immediate family. Word spread through our social circle, our church, my high school. Teachers who had been politely encouraging but not particularly invested in my success suddenly wanted to take credit for inspiring me. The guidance counselor who had suggested I be realistic about my college choices now wanted to schedule meetings to discuss how she could better support other high-achieving students. Even the local newspaper wanted to do a feature story about the local girl who made it to Harvard, though I politely declined, preferring to let my achievements speak for themselves. What fascinated me most was observing how differently people treated me once they knew about Harvard. Conversations that had previously been peppered with subtle condescension now carried a note of deference. Relatives who had spoken to me like I was a child suddenly wanted to discuss politics, current events, my thoughts on complex social issues. It was as if the Harvard acceptance letter had been a magic wand that transformed me from Robert's daughter who tries so hard to Robert's daughter, the future lawyer. The person hadn't changed, but their perception of the person had been revolutionized. During my last family dinner before leaving for college, I found myself sitting across from Aunt Catherine, who was now going out of her way to ask about my plans, my classes, my thoughts on constitutional law. She had clearly done some research, peppering her questions with references to Supreme Court cases and legal precedents. "You know, Amara," she said at one point, "I've been reading about Ruth Bader Ginsburg's time at Harvard Law School. Such an inspiring story. I imagine you'll follow a similar path." The irony wasn't lost on me. This was the same woman who, just 4 months earlier, had suggested that State University would be more realistic for someone like me. "Actually, Aunt Catherine," I replied, cutting into my salmon with deliberate precision, "I'm planning to be even more ambitious than Justice Ginsburg. She transferred to Columbia for her final year of law school. I intend to graduate from Harvard Law School and then clerk for the Supreme Court before I'm 30. The statement hung in the air for a moment, not because it was boastful, though it certainly was ambitious, but because it represented a level of confidence and long-term planning that forced everyone at the table to recalibrate their understanding of who I was and what I was capable of. My father smiled proudly, my mother beamed, and Blake choked slightly on his water. But Aunt Catherine, to her credit, recovered quickly. "That's wonderful, dear," she said. "Such important goals. I'm sure you'll achieve everything you set your mind to." What she didn't say, but what I could see in her eyes, was the dawning realization that she had spent 18 years dramatically underestimating someone who was now revealing herself to be more ambitious and capable than anyone in the family had imagined. The conversation moved on to other topics, but I noticed that the dynamic at the table had shifted permanently. I was no longer the family member who received encouraging pats on the head for modest achievements. I had become the family member whose success made everyone else's accomplishments look smaller by comparison. And while that wasn't my intention, it was certainly a satisfying side effect of finally being seen for who I really was. As my departure date for Harvard approached, I spent time reflecting on the journey that had brought me to this point. The little girl who had learned to smile and nod while relatives made assumptions about her potential had grown into a young woman who understood the power of exceeding expectations so dramatically that those expectations could never be applied to her again. I had learned that the best revenge against prejudice isn't anger or confrontation. It's excellence so undeniable that it forces people to question everything they thought they knew about who deserves what opportunities. The night before I left for Cambridge, I packed the Harvard acceptance letter in my suitcase, not because I needed it for any practical purpose, but because it had become a talisman, a reminder of the moment when I had finally answered 18 years of underestimation with one perfect, devastating truth. As I folded it carefully between my other important documents, I thought about all the other kids out there who were being told to lower their expectations, to be realistic about their dreams, to settle for less than they were capable of achieving. That's when I made a promise to myself. My success wouldn't be selfish. Every achievement at Harvard, every opportunity that came my way, every door that opened would be used not just for my own advancement, but to create pathways for other kids who looked like me, who came from backgrounds like mine, who had been underestimated in the same subtle, pervasive ways that I had been. My revenge against the soft bigotry of lowered expectations would be to become so successful that no guidance counselor would ever again suggest that a black student be realistic about Ivy League dreams. No aunt would ever again assume that state school was the ceiling for someone's potential. The morning I left for Harvard, the entire extended family gathered to see me off. It was a scene that would have been unimaginable 6 months earlier, when I was just the family member who tried so hard and deserved encouragement for her modest achievements. Now I was the family success story, the one whose future everyone wanted to be associated with, whose potential everyone claimed to have recognized all along. Aunt Catherine hugged me goodbye with what seemed like genuine warmth, though I suspected it was motivated more by her desire to be able to say she was close to her niece at Harvard than by any real affection. "Promise you'll stay in touch," she said. "I want to hear all about your classes, your professors, everything. I'm so proud of you, sweetheart." Blake shook my hand formally and said, "Good luck, Amara. Harvard's lucky to have you," which was probably the most generous thing he had ever said to me, and which I appreciated despite its obvious inadequacy. But it was my father's goodbye that nearly broke my composure. As he loaded my suitcases into the car that would take me to the airport, he pulled me aside for a private moment. "You know what I'm most proud of?" he asked, his voice thick with emotion. "It's not that you got into Harvard, though. That's incredible. It's not that you proved everyone wrong, though that was pretty satisfying to watch. It's that you never let their small thinking make you smaller. You never accepted their limitations as your own. That's the real victory, baby girl." As we drove away from the house, I looked back at the garden where my graduation party had taken place, where I had delivered my perfectly orchestrated moment of revenge. The memory still made me smile, but it also made me think about the future, about the law degree I would earn, about the Supreme Court clerkship I would pursue, about the career in constitutional law that would allow me to protect other kids from the subtle prejudices that had shaped my own childhood. That moment in the garden, when I read my Harvard acceptance letter aloud and watched Aunt Catherine's face go white with shock, hadn't just been about proving them wrong. It had been about proving to myself that I was right to dream big, right to refuse their limitations, right to believe that excellence was possible for someone like me. The best revenge isn't about making other people feel bad. It's about making yourself feel powerful, about claiming the success that was always meant to be yours. Now, 3 years later, as I sit in my dorm room at Harvard Law School, preparing for my Supreme Court clerkship interviews, I still think about that graduation party sometimes. I think about Aunt Catherine's shocked expression, about Blake's uncomfortable realization that his achievements paled in comparison to mine, about the moment when 18 years of underestimation finally met their match in one cream-colored acceptance letter. But mostly, I think about the promise I made to myself that night, the commitment to use my success as a platform for challenging assumptions and creating opportunities for others. Every time I excel in a law school class, every time I impress a professor, every time I open a door that was previously closed to someone like me, I'm keeping that promise. My revenge against the people who underestimated me isn't just personal anymore. It's systemic, institutional, generational. In that moment, standing in that garden with that Harvard letter in my hands, I didn't just feel vindication. I felt the quiet power that comes from finally understanding your own worth, from refusing to let other people's limitations become your own, from transforming their underestimation into your unstoppable motivation. That wasn't just revenge. That was revolution. The best revenge isn't served hot or cold. It's served with an acceptance letter from Harvard University and a lifetime commitment to proving that excellence has no prerequisites except hard work and unshakable belief in your own potential. If you've ever been underestimated, if you've ever been told to lower your expectations or be more realistic about your dreams, this story is for you. The sweetest revenge isn't making them feel bad about underestimating you. It's becoming so successful that they have to completely revise their understanding of what's possible. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment about the moment when you proved your doubters wrong, and subscribe to Black Revenge Diaries, because every week we're opening a new page in the book of beautiful, brilliant, perfectly orchestrated revenge. The best revenge isn't just proving them wrong, it's becoming so right that they can never doubt you again.